guy who was researching how to get away with committing a crime, number one, he shouldn't have been doing it on a searchable phone where, of course, they were going to check. And, don't look up how to kill your wife if you're going to kill your wife.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we're all just trying to survive in a rough world.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the best guests in all of true crime. And once again, today is no exception. Now, while we continue to cover the disturbing Idaho 4 murders out of Moscow, Idaho, we're also going to pivot now to another increasingly disturbing story out of Cohasset, Massachusetts, not far from where I went to college at Brandeis in Waltham, Massachusetts. Now, a quick recap. Some of you have been whining about long intros, but today it is needed if you haven't followed this case. So police have been searching since last week for Ana Walshe. She's a 39-year-old mother of three from Cohasset. That's 20 miles southeast of Boston. Now, she was reported missing on January 4th by her employer, who's a high-end real estate firm, I should say, in Washington, D.C., after her husband called to say he hadn't heard from her. Ana was last seen in the early morning hours of New Year's Day. Her husband is 46-year-old Brian Walshe. He's on house arrest for a federal fraud case involving the sale of fake Andy Warhol paintings, a modern-day con man. So today, Monday, this episode will be released on Tuesday. So yesterday, he was arraigned Monday on a charge that he misled investigators and was ordered held on a $500,000 cash bail, which he might be able to bond out of. And the twists and turns get even more disturbing from here. And here to break it down are members of the best guests of Surviving the Survivor. Wendy Murphy in the green sweater is a co-director of the Women's and Children's Advocacy Project under the Center for Law and Social Responsibility at New England Law. Since '93, she has dedicated her career to representing crime victims in all civil and criminal cases and working as an impact litigator, filing test cases to change the law and improve civil rights and constitutional rights for women and children. And I recognize Wendy from my days in TV news when you could find her everywhere on NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News Channel. She does not just play an attorney on TV, but is a very effective one in real life. And then you've got a man who might look familiar because he's been on the program before. It is Jeff Wood, a retired FBI special agent out of Boston, the great state of Massachusetts. He's a seasoned investigator who helped break down some of the worst gangs in the city of Boston. A quick programming note, you want to follow us on Insta, Facebook, Twitter. We're at Podcast STS. If you want to support us, we're on Patreon. We also have a YouTube subscription option now. And as my 8-year-old daughter says, please hit that like and subscribe button because it gets the algorithm chugging. So we are getting some breaking news, which Jeff let me know about, and I'm just going to start with that as soon as I can pull it up here. And that is that police right now are searching a trash station for this missing mother, Ana Walshe. Allegedly, according to investigators, the husband, Brian Walshe, had been searching online for how to dismember and how to dispose of a 115-pound woman's body. Wendy, you're the woman here. Anytime you hear that, guys looking about how to dispose of a body, never a very good sign and probably not going to be a good ending to this story.
Well, not a good ending at all for this poor victim, but a wonderful ending for law enforcement. If you're looking for a dumb criminal In the beginning, I thought, wow, this case is going to be, I don't know if it'll ever be solved. This guy seems too smart. And I said that because there were no pings on her phone. And, we were getting, I think, the kind of information that sometimes leads you to wonder whether we'll ever find a body. And even without a body, can the case ever be proved? But then when we start to hear the evidence, this guy really wasn't that good. And for a guy who was researching how to get away with committing a crime, number one, he shouldn't have been doing it on a searchable phone where, of course, they were going to check. And, don't look up how to kill your wife if you're going to kill your wife. How is that not thing one that you don't do? But the more we learn, I think people were suspicious from day one that he was the key suspect. And a lot of times police know more than they tell us. So we think the police aren't doing a good enough job. But of course they are. They're just not telling us. And I think sometimes what they get out of that is a lot more information. Like this guy, apparently with an attorney sitting in his house with him. This was reported today. His attorney from the federal case, for which he was wearing a bracelet, she was with him for hours in his house, letting him to speak to police. And from that, they obtained exactly the kind of evidence they needed to then be able to bring a charge for misleading law enforcement, which is the holding charge you want. Long before you ever find the body, you want a holding charge. And they got that out of him because he did talk. And when you talk and you lie, you're giving cops everything they need to hold you. And among other things, that meant that they would now get access to the children. And although the children are young, they're capable. I've had very young witnesses on the stand as a prosecutor. They know a lot and they're very credible because they're not very good at lying. So now that they're in state custody, the police having access to the children, I think, is going to help, not necessarily help find the body, but help paint a full picture about why this happened.
Wow, so that's fascinating. I think if I'm right, there are three boys, 6 and under, I want to say. But you're saying, Wendy, that state investigators will talk to these 3 young boys and see what information they can get from them. But obviously, they're going to do it in a very appropriate way. Can you talk about how they will handle these 3 young children?
Yeah, I mean, with kid gloves in the most literal sense of the word, these are traumatized children because their mother is gone, even if they didn't see anything happen to her that was scary. A lot of children who are witnesses to domestic violence are severely traumatized because they see dad hitting mom, and it scares them a lot. And sometimes they won't talk because they've been told by the abuser, you never tell anybody what's going on or I'll beat you up too. And kids are so easy to scare into silence. But there's a real chance that this isn't a family with a lot of domestic violence in the background. I don't know. But if there was anything untoward happening against this woman behind closed doors, we know that his mother was living with them. Well, you can't expect his mother to rat him out, so she's not going to be a good witness. But the kids would tell the truth, and they're certainly, in love, feeling very loving toward their mother, I presume, based on what we've heard. And they're gonna want to be helpful, and what you have to say to kids when you're trying to get them to talk about things that might be scary or things that they don't even know are scary, right? You have to ask children things that are open questions. Tell us about mommy. Tell us about what you like about mommy. Tell us about daddy. Tell us what you like about daddy. Is there anything about mommy that scares you? Is there anything about daddy that scares you? Did mommy say anything to you? Moms are not usually, even a very badly abused moms, usually will not say anything to their children to burden them emotionally or otherwise, even when they're terrified for their lives, especially not at such young ages. They're 6, 4, and 2, the 3 little kids. So we can't expect that one of them is going to say, yeah, mommy told me that daddy said he was going to kill her for the insurance money. That's not going to happen. But you might hear from a child the kind of innocent observations where, they're very sensitive. So they might describe something they see as something that was upsetting to them. but not in a way that they're thinking, boy, I got to tell this to the cops. So you let children talk, get them comfortable, and just ask them to narrate and tell stories and describe what their lives were like. And they're always going to say something. They're always going to say something that matters because they're the witnesses to their own lives, and they're way more in touch than you think. They're little people. Their brains aren't particularly well developed, but boy, are they sensitive, and they know what's going on. They really do.
Wow, that's fascinating. I can tell. I mentioned it before. I covered Sandy Hook Elementary when I was at Fox 5 in New York. At the time, I had no children, and I remember other reporters who were parents breaking down there because it was so emotional. And when you're talking about these three kids, and I have three kids similar in age, having to be questioned, it's gut wrenching to hear that.
Can I
Jeff,
add
to
one other
you,
thing to that?
yeah.
Uh, I know that, and she's been on the show. Ann Burgess has, when she's interviewed people, she's also had the kids draw things because they will actually draw things that will depict something that they've seen if they're not willing to talk yet. So that's another technique that can be used with young children to help get them to open up and start talking by having them draw different scenes at first and get them to open up. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I know
No,
she's
that's interesting. The great Ann Burgess and Dr. Gary Bricado, I actually reached out to them about this case, waiting to get their 2 cents on this, but they're friends of the show, as is Jeff, and we've had them on before. We're going to kind of go piecemeal through this because it's the first time we are doing this case. Back to this, Jeff, to you, the fact that he is Googling how to dispose of a 115-pound body, in the 7 weeks that we were waiting for a suspect to be arrested in the Idaho 4 case, people were building up the alleged killer into this mastermind. And now we find out that a sheath with his fingerprint was left there. Does it ever amaze you, Jeff, that criminals can be pretty dumb? I mean, the thought that he is Googling this, not thinking investigators are going to find this, is, nursery school level planning, I would say.
Well, we have a thing that we always said in law enforcement. Thank God for some of the dumb mistakes people make because it keeps us employed and gives us the time where we can solve some cases because the smart ones takes a lot more work and can be a lot harder. So you need some successes along the way, and this gives you those successes. But you'd be amazed at how many times people think, okay, I've deleted my cookie here, but maybe they printed it, then they've deleted everything, but maybe in their in one section of the computer that they thought they've wiped most things, but there's one place still left where that Google or whatever it is still there that enables police to find it. So it's I like to call it luck. I don't think it's really luck. I think it's more about hard work conducted by law enforcement officers, and they develop their own luck that catches these kind of breaks where you can see something where a guy, here I am Googling, and it's somewhere on the computer and they find it that helps us now build our case, the bigger case, right? Because as was mentioned earlier, he lied about what he was doing. He wasn't allowed to leave the house because he's under house arrest for his federal fraud conviction. He hasn't been sentenced yet for that, but he's been found guilty. Now that gives us the ability to get him locked up, gives us the ability to start getting more search warrants, do more things to find more evidence and build our case of murdering this woman. I mean, I know we're thinking that's what's happened. I can't imagine anything else. I don't think anyone else would disagree with that thought, but it's just, where else would she be? I'm supposed to leave it early in the morning. Everyone now today uses their phone. Like, right, they get the phone. They've got their electronic ticket on the phone. They're checking to make sure things aren't whatever. And her phone's off. She's supposed to get a ride share. Her phone's off. How do you get your ride? These things lead us to believe like the foul play has been involved, and now we have to find more.
And we're going to get into some of those details. Wendy, to you, you're not a criminal profiler, but you've been around long enough to know how some of these people operate. What was really disturbing, among many things today, was seeing him enter the courtroom almost giddy. He had this huge grin on his face, seemed to love the cameras. He's, as Jeff just said, he's already under house arrest for a federal crime. He's a con man. How does this speak to his character if, in fact, he just murdered his wife, which is what people are presuming, and you've got this guy basically smiling ear to ear? Not a good person.
Yeah, among other things. I'm always, I've been covering for TV, covering these kinds of things, but also as a prosecutor working on cases with perpetrators, including murder cases, where, you try to guess what is it with their demeanor that gives some tell, like what can we glean from how they're behaving? Um, and the one thing that struck me, and I think it's based only on my experience, I don't know that there's any research on this, is that smiling goes together with narcissism. And narcissism is very close to sociopathy. So if you can be so self-centered, so self-focused that you smile at an inappropriate time because you don't know that that's a bad thing to do, even if you're an idiot of a criminal, that's probably not a good thing. And he's got a good lawyer who knows, like, she was with him. She should have said, remember, don't smile. But even if she did, he might not have been able to control himself. So I think of kind of this presentation of arrogance mixed with this notion that he's got to be a narcissist of some degree, and the kind of person who would defraud someone and try to sell a fake Warhol. I mean, my brain goes, who does that? Like, who does that? And then, when I think about my work on violence against women cases, he's really rather typical if that's how he is. I don't know. I'm guessing based on the little bits that I've seen, but domestic violence perpetrators, especially those who are really violent and even those who become homicidal, they tend to have these characteristics. They tend to have this sense of entitlement. Entitlement is highly correlated with violence against women, but a sense of entitlement, you can see how that crosses over with this notion of narcissism and I should smirk at this moment in time. It's just, I hate to call it a mental health issue, because a lot of people with very bad mental health problems never hurt anybody. So I don't want to say he's got a mental health issue. To me, it's closer to sociopathy, which is, the kind of person you want to lock up because you can't tune him up. You got to lock him up. And we'll see. We're judging him very harshly without knowing very much. So take this for what it's worth. But, there's something about this guy that made him feel like, I think I should not only kill my wife, whether because I'm angry or because I need the money and I've got a big insurance policy on her, which may turn out to be the case. But I think I should kill this woman for money or for whatever the reason. And I think I'm going to get away with it. You got to be a really strange, pathologically strange person to think that way. And it has nothing to do with, well, because because I think it's weird that he's from Cohasset, this wealthy town in Massachusetts where people don't do things like that. Make no mistake, people in Cohasset, people in the richest towns in this country abuse their wives. So let's be clear about that. But it's hard for people to think it happens in a place like that. And I think we have to stop asking that kind of question and say, well, does it happen at the hands of men like that? And the answer is absolutely. This is exactly the kind of guy who does what we think he all did.
Very interesting. I should say at this juncture that Brian Walshe is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, and want to make that very clear because we do not know the whole picture. But the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, prosecutor with that office today in court, said that investigators did find a bloody knife in the basement. So things are piling up in the home. that Ana Walshe shared with her husband, and he was charged with misleading police. Agent Wood, to you, Jeff, um, is this just a tactic right now from law enforcement to tie him up on this state charge? And do you see a murder charge coming in the very near future? Or we just don't know yet.
It's kind of hard because we don't know the evidence that they have, right? There was blood found in the basement. The knife was found in the base. Well, we don't know where the knife was found, but there was some blood on the knife. The knife was damaged. Some of my stabbing gang related incidents that I've seen how much damage a knife can take when killing someone. So if the knife is damaged, and based on the fact that he was Googling how to dispose a body, I imagine I'm going to guess, this is my thought, being an investigator, he was trying to cut up her body and he damaged the blade while cutting through joints. I believe I didn't see the part, but you mentioned that, or I think I may have read either you mentioned or I read somewhere they were searching a trash facility now.
Yeah, that's what they're doing right now. Yeah.
So in my mind, that is also very telling because we have done searches at trash places, and it can take a long time, but we have found very good evidence at these places. So if they find more evidence, yes, we can definitely see a charge of murder brought against him. But we just don't know the evidence yet. But I can see the fact where they're going, the searching, they're building their case just like they did everywhere else, and they're going to charge when they have enough for PC, and then go from there.
What's interesting is in the Brian Koberger case with the 4 college students in Idaho, obviously they believe and know that crime was committed with some sort of weapon, presumably a knife, a fixed blade knife. Jeff just said in this case, maybe the knife was used, excuse me, to dismember the body. We just don't know yet without getting too graphic. I reached out to Dr. Gary Bricado, who works with Ann Burgess, who's also a doctor, Dr. Ann Burgess, because Gary says that those who use knives are more likely to be mentally ill. So, Wendy, I'm curious to get your take. It sounds to you like it's more like a narcissism issue, not a mental illness. Am I right?
Well, I don't know the research. I do know Anne. I've worked with her and I've known her for a very long time. If the research says that, then I respect that. But the reason I don't like blaming mental illness for anything, to me, if there's a correlation that people with knives tend to have mental illness, that's still not causation, right? So let's be clear about that. But because we know that 99% of mentally ill people, even severely mentally ill people, never hurt anyone, we have to be really careful not to turn to the idea of mental illness as the explanation, much less the excuse or justification that gives the perpetrator a pass or even a discount. Because you have to have accountability. If you're the kind of person that's going to kill, whatever the reason, you can't be in society. So I don't have a lot of I don't want to spend a lot of energy on worrying about the person's mental health. I do think motive matters, and it matters a lot more than mental illness. If this guy killed her because he's got a life insurance policy and he wanted the money, then he might also have mental illness, but who cares? He was motivated to kill because of his need for money. But the knife issue also, I think we know, and Jeff might correct me, but it's a very intimate weapon. It tends to be used by people who have strong feelings, usually feelings of rage, because of the close proximity between the killer and the victim, and there's a lot of contact. And that rage needs that kind of contact sometimes. And it's also quieter. I mean, if you're trying to kill somebody in a house and you don't want to wake up the neighbors, you can't use a gun. I mean, I guess you can use a gun with a silencer, but a knife is less sloppy. If you get a gun, there's all these questions about the ability to track and gunpowder residue and all of that. So, in some ways, knives are smarter if you're going to be a killer. And let's face it, she was tiny, 115 pounds. Presumably, his Google search was correct about her weight. But if she was, I mean, he looks a bit like a beast to me. I don't know how tall he is, but he could have strangled her. It's a very common way to kill a woman. Strangulation is probably the number one form of lethal violence. Guns are up there too, but it's a high um, prevalence form of killing a woman by a man, strangulation, because it's fairly easy to do. It's quiet. And then the knife could have just been the implement, as you suggested, used in an attempt to cut up the body and dispose of it without having to carry this big body outside where all the neighbors would have seen. I think it's easier to carry small parts, and certainly he thought about that apparently if he was trying to cut up the body. So that's kind of my thoughts about the weapon. But I still think, I mean, we still have to come back to this idea that this guy is so smart that he knows to keep her phone somewhat effectively, keep her phone from pinging. Although we did learn today that it pinged not only January 1st around the area of her house, but also January 2nd. It pinged near her home, which means not only did she not get on a plane, she didn't leave her home area, at least on the second she was around there. So how come this guy was so smart to know to deal with the pinging, and perhaps he tried to hide his Google search, but he left the knife in the basement? How stupid do you have to be? How can you be so smart and so stupid at the same time? I don't think mental illness explains that disparity. I just think he was not clever enough. It also suggests a degree of impulsivity to me. So for all the planning he might have been doing, he didn't do a lot of planning because he would have been more careful. That's how I feel at this point, given what we're hearing about some of the real sloppy things he did.
Well, as the son of a licensed social worker and my father, who was a practicing psychiatrist, he would say what you say, and that is, in spite of a mental illness, you still have choice, assuming that your mental illness is not like schizophrenia and incredibly debilitating. And this person, if he killed her or did something sinister, still had the choice, obviously, not to do it, and chose the wrong thing. But back to you, Wendy, in your opinion, is this from what we're seeing right now, is this textbook domestic violence?
It might be. It's a funny issue. It's funny that you asked that question because I've been working for a long time on the issue of hate crimes against women. And Jeff probably knows this. If you kill a woman because she's a woman, under federal law, it's a hate crime. But under state law in Massachusetts, if you kill a woman because she's a woman, it's not a hate crime. Women are the only category of people not covered. Everybody else is covered. Transgender, sexual orientation, disability, everyone but women. And yet women suffer the most hate crimes by far, more than all the other categories combined. So federal law covers women as victims of hate crimes, and about half the states do, but lots of states don't. Massachusetts is an embarrassment for its refusal, like really fierce political refusal to add women to hate crimes. So not surprisingly, we end up with higher numbers of dead women at the hands of men, because there's this sense that not that we should run around killing women, but that it's not as bad as when you kill another type of person. So I mention this because when I've talked to cops about this, and I say, what do you think about this idea of recognizing, especially domestic violence, as a hate crime? Almost all the chiefs I've spoken to say, yeah, we should. It should be. But how are we going to know the difference? How are you going to know the difference between a man who kills a woman for one reason or another reason? How do you know if it's a hate crime or not? When is it because she's a woman? So I would say this. You asked me, is this a domestic violence case? Is it a classic domestic violence case? I would say this. If we end up learning that he routinely beat her, he tried to control her, he tried to keep her money from her, he tried to dictate the conditions of her life, then yes, it's a sort of classic domestic violence case. And in that sense, it should be a hate crime. We should all think of this as a hate crime. However, if because he got pinched on the federal case last year and now he owes his lawyer a fortune and he's got to repay the victims and the court's going to impose some kind of big fine on him because he got convicted of white collar fraud for the Andy Warhol painting problem that he had. And that's why they had to sell their home last year to bring in some cash to take care of his problems associated with that. And maybe he's got other money problems, business related money problems. And he killed her just for the money. I'm not sure that's a domestic violence case. It technically is because it's a husband who killed a wife. But would I call it a hate crime when the only reason he did it was for the cash? That's a closer question.
Very interesting. The nuances there. I didn't, to be honest, ever think about a hate crime directed at a crime directed at your spouse as possibly being a hate crime, but a very interesting point. Agent Wood, Jeff, the husband said he last saw her, and this is Anna, early on January 1st, when she took an Uber or a Lyft, he said, to the airport to fly to Washington, D.C., where she worked for this real estate firm. However, there's a problem with that. Police found out upon their investigation that there was no Uber or Lyft called that day. She didn't arrive to her flight or to D.C., and her cell phone actually pinged home later in the day. Not keeping your story straight is a red flag for guys like you, right? I mean, you're questioning him, you're finding inconsistencies in the story. She ordered a car, there was never a car ordered. Immediately, your antenna is going up, I assume.
Absolutely. Anytime I interviewed somebody, I would say interrogation. It's not a meet, right? I have somebody under arrest. I have someone under suspicion. One, I always like to have a good partner with me, someone we could work together on. And you let somebody tell their story. And one thing I've always noticed is that when you go through a story, things are very detailed, and then a crime occurs, and then there's no details, right? And then they get back and their details after the crime. So if I was the lead, I go in and you start pressing them on the details, and you let them sink themselves with those details or the lack of details, and then you can come back and start hitting if they're willing to keep talking, to then try and trick them up, saying, "Well, it's not making sense." Some people will finally come clean and say, "All right, here's what you got to do," and you have to figure out the way to by building rapport and learning the way to get them to come clean. Some people will never come clean, but yes, you listen to those details and you can back them up. As he said, "Oh, I saw her in the morning. She was going to Uber." Well, who has their phone initially, until it pinged on the second, but it was pretty much turned off early that morning for a while until the second. Who turns their phone off when they're trying to get an Uber? No one. Who turns their phone off when they're going to go to the airport to catch a plane? You turn your phone off once you get on the plane. They say put it on the airplane mode, right? So the phone is on. So obviously he didn't think it out. I would go so far to guess. I don't know. To me, I know. Who knows what was going on in the relationship? Was he being abusive to her a long time? I don't know. But the fact that she was able to travel to DC to work all the time, I don't necessarily see an aspect of controlling there at that point. So for me, is my first thought, and you can't put any motive or any type of reasoning aside. You got to list them all. But I'm wondering, did they have a fight early on recently? Was it because he needs money because of his crime? What's going on? And in that fit of rage that morning or whatever, he then does what we suspect. We don't know for sure yet, but we have a pretty strong suspicion. And
But
in most of
can
these
I just
types
say one quick thing, Jeff? Because I wonder what you think of this. Doesn't a lot of what you just said matter regarding the timing of when he Googled how to get rid of a body, right? Because if he Googled that 3 days before, then that's not a rage killing, right?
Oh, absolutely, and we don't know that yet, unfortunately. But and again, based on the limited knowledge we have right now, my guess, without being an investigator, great. If I was there as an investigator, we would definitely know, right? Okay, computer shows you Googled this 3 days ago, a month ago. Obviously, this is being planned a long time. But was it happening on the first second where he Googles, and that's the day she disappeared, right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make a guess right now saying if she's traveling to DC every week to work, I'm not quite sure where this came from and something. So does and again, this is not to throw any dirt out there or anything. Was she having an affair?
Yeah.
Right? And he finds out, and boom, rage right then and there. Oh my God, what I've done, I gotta hide the body. So it's not really well planned.
Yeah.
I can make mistakes more. But again, unfortunately for us, we're sitting on the outside now. We're no longer sitting right there. We're not the lead investigator where I've had my computer gurus go through the computer and say, oh, he Googled this month ago. Oh, he's been planning this a long time.
Mm.
He's made a lot of mistakes, right? So these are things that we need to look at. But again, yes, for us in this case, I definitely think that the fact that you're seeing these mistakes made, it's leading us to believe, and it's a fair presumption on our parts to think, yes, he killed this woman, so now she's a victim, her kids are victims, her family's a victim. We've talked before, you know, he's not a good guy here, but now his family's also a victim because they have to live with the stigma that their son killed an innocent woman here, right? So the good thing is that we have this evidence, and hopefully we'll be able to to be able to prove, because as you know, as a prosecutor, you never know what a jury is going to think. So you get the wrong jury and you can have the best evidence and lose a case, right? So it's one of those things where let's hope that and I know a lot of the state police investigators out there. I worked with the state police for 20 years. I love my partners from the state police. I worked more with the state police than I worked with my own FBI agents because of the way the task force worked. We each were doing different things. They're great investigators, and I can only imagine that they're doing a great job gathering all the necessary evidence that they need to support the Cohasset police to gather the evidence to take a successful prosecution against this guy.
And we know that they flew down to DC pretty quickly. So I don't think anyone thinks they went down there thinking they would find her, but they probably went down there to take a statement from witness, which might well be the man she's having an affair with, if you're right about that. I think it's equally plausible that she found another guy there. Maybe she even told her husband, listen, I'm leaving you because it's the new year and this is my resolution. I'm going to cut the cord with you. You're a bum, you're a criminal, and I'm done. And maybe relatedly, she wanted to sell the house last year. I don't know how that house was owned or what his role was, but it's possible that when she found out he was an art fraud and a convicted federal felon, she also figured, I'm out of here. I don't want to raise my kids with a man like this. Not that that's the worst crime in the world, but a lot has happened in their life in the past year that could have changed her view of him and led down this path for her. But still, let's all be clear. A woman can have an affair with, a guy or 3 men and 5 goats, and you can't kill her. You can't.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I was just saying maybe.
I think you were saying that's what could have triggered it.
Guy, I'm just saying that was a switch in him that's like, instead of just saying, as a good friend of mine once said after he got divorced, you know why a divorce costs so much? Because it's worth it, right? He instead of just saying, look, you're right, we're failed marriage, let's get divorced and handle it like adults, he does a stupid thing here.
And
And
then it comes back to my point about this would be a hate crime if Massachusetts covered this, because if you kill a woman because you're angry that she likes somebody else, that is classic hate crime material. You're
I,
killing her because you think you own her, because you think you should be able to control her, because you're not happy that she is going to choose somebody other than you. There's the narcissism again, there's the pathology again. And frankly, to me, when you kill for that reason, historically in the law, we've had this rule I'm sure you've all heard of called the heat of passion rule, which we tend to think of as a bit of a discount or a reason to justify or excuse somebody's behavior. But over the course of time, I've come to believe, and a lot of people are on board with this, that if you kill because of jealousy, if you kill because of rage related to your emotional connection to someone, in that sense that you're angry at them for not loving you or for separating from you or for daring to separate from you or divorce you or whatever, that's a reason to punish you extra. That's a reason to give you more punishment. The death penalty, that's an aggravating factor, not a discounting factor. And so, it's really important to talk about this case if that turns out to be what happened here. Really important to talk about this case as one where the evidence does not give him any degree of forgiveness or mitigation. There's no place for mitigation when you're jealous about your wife leaving you. There's only room to punish you more harshly for being so arrogant, pathological, et cetera, that you think somehow you have an entitlement to be rageful, much less kill, in response to somebody else choosing a free life without
oh,
you.
I completely agree. And don't forget too, right? What was the reason that she was supposedly flying down there? If there was an emergency for a house she was selling. Who works on January 1st? No one. They were also going down to interview the employer to catch the husband in another lie as well, right? Maybe they found out about the boyfriend, which would be great evidence. And then also the employer saying, hey, did you ask her to come back on January 1st? No, who works on January 1st? Everyone's off.
That always had a little bit of a strangeness, the strange feel to it. But then she would have been the dummy, right? If she said to him, I've got to go down the first because there's an emergency, a red flag to me. Of course you don't. So either he confronted her, or in fact, she really didn't need to go on the first, right? That he set the timeline up. That was his fraud, that he needed those 3 days to get rid of the body. And you got to build them in somehow by making up a lie about when he
Absolutely.
needs to go.
But again, here's another classic mistake. If according to what we've read in the news, she was very devoted to her children. So if she's down there and she's calling to talk to them all the time, why hasn't he reported her missing on, hey, she took off. She would have called and checked in with me the moment she landed to talk to the kids. I'm here. That didn't happen. The employer says she's missing first 3 days later, because that's when the employer thought that she was arriving. So again, here we go,
No emergency.
no emergency. So the thought is there's many different thoughts of why they killed her. One is he needed the money. Two, he found out she was leaving him, and then he went into the fit of rage. And those are the two big. I mean, there could be small
There's a
subsets,
very big.
but to me,
Yep.
those are the two big ones that we're looking at here.
I would like to know if the police know, and I think they do, but they haven't reported yet, when that ticket was purchased. Was it a last minute purchase? Did she purchase it? Did he purchase it? Like how much of
Well,
the lie was that ticket purchase on? Because they did say that she did have a ticket.
she had a ticket for January 3rd. Did we ever find out if she really had the ticket switched to January 1st? Or was that
That's a little bit unclear.
what he reported? Again, here are all these questions that we're trying to now determine. And again, I know in our society today, we want the answers now from the police, but the police and the prosecutors can't divulge that to us, right? During all my investigations, I couldn't talk publicly about, okay, this is what we have, because we can't. We can't
No. And
discuss
in fact,
ongoing investigations.
the police said publicly he's cooperating when some of us knew that he had lawyered up. But when most of us say, for the most part, when someone says he lawyered up, we think he took the fifth. This guy lawyered up and didn't take the fifth. So he actually had his lawyer sitting with him for hours with police asking him questions. So technically he lawyered up but didn't take the fifth, which is very unusual, extremely unusual. But it allowed the police to say publicly, in fact, they were compelled to say publicly, he's cooperating. Otherwise,
Well,
they wouldn't have said anything. But he was cooperating under the, like, not just watchful guidance. His lawyer was sitting right with him for hours and hours. So his lawyer was, in a sense,
here's the
controlling what he
here's
said.
the question: how is he cooperating? Right? I
Right.
mean, again, this is where I think he's. We always give credit where credit probably is not due. Right? We talk about the Idaho being very smart, and for college, yes, he's very smart, but he had never done this. And just because I studied this doesn't mean that I can now become a great investigator and commit the perfect crime that will baffle investigators. Here's another instance, right? My wife is missing. If I lawyer up and take the fifth and don't talk at all, that's also painting a big sign on my back. Like, what husband who hasn't killed his wife isn't talking to the police going, "Where's my wife? Help me find my wife. I need my wife," right? Because that person still loves his wife and wants to be with her. In this case, he at least was in that mind smart enough to say, "Well, if I go that route, they're going to know that I've
And he might have done
taken."
that with advice of counsel. I'm sure the first person he called was Tracy Minor, his lawyer from the federal case, and she probably said, "Whatever you do, don't say I take the fifth," because that'll absolutely croak your case. And in the court of public opinion, you're doomed. So she goes to his house and babysits him in front of the police for 8 hours. The police are compelled to say he's cooperating because he is, but they don't say, because they can't say, he's cooperating under the watchful eye of his lawyer for 8 hours. And because it's such an unusual situation, I don't think anybody assumed his lawyer was sitting there holding his hand. Although I said to a reporter friend of mine, call Tracy, because he's still on a bracelet, hasn't been sentenced yet in the federal case. So that's technically his lawyer. He's not going to call somebody else. He's going to call the lawyer with whom he has a relationship, because having been charged even with this minor misdemeanor at this point today, he gets charged with misleading investigators. Because he got charged even with this minor misdemeanor, the feds can surrender him, because he was out on bail pending sentencing on the federal case. Well, when you're out on bail pending sentencing, you're not allowed to commit any crimes, including spitting on the sidewalk, and shoplifting and this other fairly minor thing, misleading investigators. So they can surrender him. And
I wouldn't be surprised, because I know that they did say, "Hey, we've made this $5 million bail where if he paid 500,000, he can get out." If he was supposed, if he's close to doing that, I wouldn't be surprised if the Norfolk DA goes to the U.S. Attorney and say, "Can you revoke and get him
yep,
locked up so we
and
can?"
they will. They
Oh,
absolutely will.
obviously, because we did that reverse where we wanted someone locked up and you had something on them saying, "Hey, detain this guy until we come in," and they would have to detain him until.
Well, because it's such a brilliant strategy when you're in any level of law enforcement and you need to squeeze someone, you got to get them under your control, and it's not easy to do. Almost everybody does something wrong enough, broken taillight, you can grab them. But this guy being on a bracelet made it so easy. Being on a bracelet because he's still out on a federal charge, man, that was a gift. That was a gift in a case like this. Uh, you
And
know,
purchasing $450 worth of cleaning equipment. I mean, again,
I
does
don't think
not
I purchased that much my
it's
entire
another
life.
bullseye of what are you doing? Who needs $450 worth of cleaning equipment? I mean, when I've gone out to buy, oh, my vacuum went out, I need a new vacuum. Maybe I'm spending close to that.
$3.99. Yeah, but
God,
you know what else, Jeff? He knew he knows about electronic tracing. I mean, this is potentially related to his awareness of how electronic transferring stuff worked and what evidence killed him in the federal case, right? Because he got in trouble for all sorts of things, wire stuff there. So he's super aware that electronic stuff is deadly. So he paid cash for his
Yes.
Home Depot cleaning supplies, as if he forgot to remember they also have cameras. The cameras came probably long
And his
before
bracelet put him there.
his bracelet. Even without the cameras, you're wearing a bracelet. Like, why didn't you?
He's
cut
paying
your
cash,
bracelet?
but he's paying cash, but he's Googling how to dump a body. See how good the guests are on this program that I don't even have to be here. They're so good. Couple of facts I just want to reiterate here. So investigators say they determined that Ana Walshe had a plane ticket for January 3rd, which she never used, which we mentioned. She also never showed up at the airport or her job or the apartment she and her husband own in DC. And again, it was also determined that no Uber or Lyft picked her up on January 1st. Now, we were talking about his defense attorney. The attorney came out and says that Brian Walshe has been incredibly cooperative, she said. And then the judge set bail at $500,000 cash. That is, I guess, a defense attorney's job. Someone, by the way, pointed out the last couple of cases, Brian Laundrie, Brian Koberger, now Brian Walshe. It's going to become an ignominious name to many. So watch out, you Brians. But to you, Wendy, with all your experience in domestic violence, and this came up a little bit, I'm curious to get your take on this. Is there some sort of math equation? Like, what part of domestic violence crimes occur because of control? What part are financial? What part are a crime of passion that you find out your spouse is having an affair and you just explode? Is there some sort of data, which I'm sure there is?
If there is, I can't quote it. I'm not focused on dividing the cookie that way, if you will. I'm very comfortable saying that if you've got issues with control over money, you very likely have issues about control over other things. They're so intertwined. And to me, the categories you just described are different aspects of the larger thing that matters, which is that this is a person who feels a sense of entitlement, period, over a woman, whether that entitlement is expressed in the form of I need you to make dinner for me every night and I expect you to, or I'm going to let you know how much money you can spend and when you can spend it. Those come from the same evil, and it doesn't matter to me. If you've just got this attitude about your wife that she should do certain things, that there's an expectation that she should do certain things, from the laundry, something benign like the laundry, to something more serious like she has to submit to you sexually, even if she doesn't want to, that's rape. Just because you're married and you might have an expectation that you're in the same bed, something's going to happen. There's no legal entitlement to touch anybody, and that goes both ways. A woman can't say anything like that to her husband either. And everybody gets to control their own person in all ways, not just their body, but their ability to live free in the world, to walk freely in society, to become educated, do we really even have to discuss this? It seems so silly to me, but it's true. And this is why I think it's important to keep saying it. There are couples today that live in terrible circumstances where the abuse is incredible, but it's not physical. It is controlling, it is coercive, it is manipulative. The person being controlled, which is usually the woman, not always, could be the man, but it's usually the woman, and that person is living in circumstances that you would really think of as almost an enslavement, and yet we don't shine a light on it because it's behind closed doors. we have very little law enforcement involvement because we tend not to do anything unless there's a bruise or a black eye, or at least she calls 911 for help. And even if she calls 911 and the police do something and they take him to the courthouse, there's the revolving door, and the prosecutors routinely drop the charges. And what happens? It escalates. And those are the kind of cases that go from minor controlling behavior to some form of abuse, and eventually, you get that much higher risk of homicide. And by the way, that this issue of strangulation, if he did kill her with strangulation as the primary method, that is the most significant red flag. Just because I know people are listening and watching, and we should be educational to the extent we can, assuming there's domestic violence in this case. Anytime a man puts his hands anywhere near a woman's neck or face, and it doesn't have to be an actual strangulation, it doesn't have to be any kind of really abusive force to the face or the neck, that is the most important red flag that indicates the strongest likelihood that she will be dead one day at his hands, because this is when it's all over for the guy. Once he starts touching the face, the intimacy of the neck and the face, then the next step to homicide is a small one. So it'd be interesting to see whether there, and if we do find her, and whether there is any history of domestic violence, whether there was, any indication of older injuries, which can sometimes appear.
Well, and it looks like Wendy froze for a moment. Oh, you froze up there for one moment.
Okay. All I know is I've been doing this work, and particularly with regard to violence against women, for over 35 years, and it's gotten much worse. It's gotten much worse. There are more dead women. There are more abused women. And, I think 25, 30 years ago, the number of dead women killed by men in this country was around 3 a day. That was a long time ago. Today, the number is over 5. And it's probably over 6. I mean, I always think the numbers are lower than the truth, but over 5 women a day are killed by men in this country. And that's the
What do you
highest.
attribute the increase to?
Well, it's a complicated answer, but the short version is our legal system has never embraced the idea that violence behind closed doors is a public problem. We've dipped our toe into the idea, but we've never put our whole foot in. And so because there is this systemic bias against women and this inclination to let a woman drop the charges and choose to live in a violent home, because we have this very twisted sense that we should let her make that choice for herself, it really has turned into almost an accepted form of decriminalization. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. We were moving toward more criminalization, and then the floor on that fell out. But for me, the more you decriminalize, and when you talk about things like decarceration and bail reform, I mean, you're really talking about handing more tools to men who are abusive to not just commit acts of violence, but to commit them with impunity, to get away with it because he now expects, rightly so, and the woman now expects, rightly so, that doesn't really matter what he does to her until she dies. No one's really going to do anything about it. And this idea of no-drop policies, which I just made quick reference to, is a big piece of the story, because in some parts of the country, once a domestic violence report is made, the case cannot be dropped. I mean, the guy might not go to prison for the rest of his life, but you can't just let the woman drop the charges, because number one, it's not her case. And number two, you don't want her power to drop the case, because that's like giving the power to him. And we don't want criminals being able to dictate to the criminal justice system and to police, do what you want. I'm just going to drop the charges tomorrow. But if you let an abused woman drop the charges, you're really letting the abuser control the criminal justice system. That policy has grown over the past 25 years in this country. And there are pockets where it's not true, But where that policy has grown, and it is uniformly true in Massachusetts, every district attorney in this state allows women to drop the charges, which is to say, every district attorney in this state allows abusive men to drop the charges because all they have to do is pick up the phone and tell the woman, drop the charges or I'm going to kill you, drop the charges and I'll love you again, drop the charges and I'll let you visit the children. I mean, it's so easy for that to happen. And that's the law in Massachusetts. That's a law mixed with some bad public policy, if you ask me. But there are some states where no drop policies are very firm. And in those jurisdictions,
And there goes Wendy. Oh, you just cut right out. But Wendy, I'm going to get right back to you. I'm going to get right back to you. No worries at all. Your Wi-Fi is teetering. Jeff, to you, I'm curious. There was a strange occurrence, and I'm wondering what this did to your investigative antennae. On Saturday, a fire broke out at the home formerly belonging to Ana Walshe and her husband. If you're investigating this case, are you looking at that fire, or is it nothing in terms of making a difference on your radar?
Again, this would be sitting out like right now. Yes, I'd be interested in looking at it. But if I was working the case and I had the evidence I had in front of me, it could be something that was just, hey, they've been out of the house 10 months now. When did they? I can't remember when they sold it, but it's close to a year or so.
I believe
March.
so.
March. Okay, so we're getting close. We're 9 months, 10 months. It could be something that was just, it just happened. Who knows? I mean, that is one of the things that we all like. Oh, this happened here. It's got to be tied in. We just don't know. And if I didn't have as much evidence that, again, if I didn't have a lot of evidence, yes, I would look harder at it and try and figure out why did this happen. But I thought they came back out and said, the fire investigator came out and said there was some faulty wiring and some more that caused that fire. So I'm going to go off after hearing that. I'm probably just going to say, nope, I'm not worried about it.
A couple more quick things, and we'll get to a few STS Nation questions and comments, and then we will wrap it for the moment. This was another red flag in anyone's book. I think he says that he got lost. This is Brian Walshe on the way to his mom's house. My mother lives in Miami, not far from me, and I don't think I've ever gotten lost on the way to her home. He says within 15 minutes of arriving at his mother's condominium after getting lost, he said he left to run errands at Whole Foods and CVS in Swampscott. Police obviously checked surveillance video, and there was no video of him. So, Wendy, to you, first of all, I'm curious if you think that fires anything. And again, are we talking about a narcissist who's has such an inflated self-ego that he's going to tell police that he got lost on the way to his mother's house and just have them say, oh, yeah, that happens all the time? Of course he did.
Well, I agree with Jeff that the fire seems literally coincidental and not anything, even though I appreciate the fire because it made a whole lot more people pay attention to this case. So I'm really glad. I mean, sad for the family, but I'm glad that even though it's coincidental, it did make people listen more and pay attention more. And I'm not sure narcissists make up stories about getting lost on their way to their mothers, but I do think you have to be super narcissistic to think that anybody would believe you when your lie is so obviously a lie. I mean, how far does your brain have to get from objectively capable of processing information to think, I'm going to tell this to police and they're going to believe me? So saying it is one thing, but thinking that anybody would believe you is such a separate question for me that either he had to come up with something and he knew they wouldn't believe him, which is probably true, Um, or he does have that sense of himself that he can say whatever and everybody will just think, oh, he's so great. And he's, he tried to save his mother in law's life one time when she was choking or whatever that story was. So he does have this sense of himself that he can get away with making up stories, which I do think is a mental illness, but I still don't let him get a discount out of me for that. But what's great about it is he lied about something important. He didn't lie about dumb stuff. He lied about important stuff. He lied by not telling police he went to Home Depot. That's an important fact. So the fact that he lied about it makes the case stronger. He lied about not about going to the area of his mother's house because apparently police think that's where he disposed of the body, which would have taken it to a different dump location than where the body would go if it were dumped in Cohasset. I could be wrong on this. Jeff might know better, but I thought I heard somebody say that if he's thinking about, and especially if he Googled how to get rid of a dead body, I'm sure he landed at some website that said, cut it up and bring it to a trash dump because all the smells there will interfere with the ability of a dog to sniff out a corpse. And I think that's actually true. It's harder for dogs in a trash dump, but it makes it a little bit easier, I think, when it's cold out than when it's hot and other things happen when the heat is hot. So that could be a benefit to law enforcement. But I guess what I'm saying is because he lied about going to his mom's house, I think it helps law enforcement then focus more on what he lied about because they're thinking to themselves, this is probably going to help us find the body. And I think it will. So I'm glad, it just the harder he lies, in some ways, the more of a tell it is that that's where police should spend their energy. Because in a case like this, if he took the fifth and said nothing, they'd have the whole world to deal with, the whole world of possibilities, the whole world of dumps and dump sites. And when you're trying to eliminate the whole world of possibilities, that takes a lot more resources. And this guy really, I think, has helped law enforcement focus faster. So thanks.
And we don't know the kind of knife. Obviously, if this is a tiny little steak knife, he's not dismembering a body with that. So if we knew the type of knife, that might lead us to understand a little better about what the utility of that knife was. Well, there's one other thing, Jeff, that I wanted to cover with you. So according to court documents that were released today, Brian Walshe told police that he and his wife had dinner with a friend at their home on New Year's Eve. If you're an investigator, what are you asking this mystery person right now? First of all, you're making sure that this person really existed, I assume. And if they did, you're going to drill down on, I am assuming again, were there any arguments at dinner? Did they seem like they were getting along? Is that the type of stuff you're going to get at when talking to this person, Jeff?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, hopefully he'd give you a name and a number. Well, who'd you have dinner with? So that way you do know who you're going to go talk to, and you sit down and you talk to him and you find out. Talk to me about the relationship, not just about that night, but go back, right? We want to find out a pattern. Has this guy been abusing his wife for a long period of time? Has he, what's the dynamics between the two of them? Not just that night, but go back as far as you can. And I'd also, to me, it wouldn't stop just with him. You would start interviewing a lot of people, right? The one problem that you're going to have that to me to show was he physically abusive up to this point is going to be a little bit more difficult because she's traveling constantly to DC for work. And to me, it would be harder unless he was very smart about if he was abusing her, where he was hitting her, right? Because if you hit her in the eye, she's going to be on the airplane with the big sunglasses on trying to hide. And that's going to make it hard for her to do her job as a real estate agent because people are going to say, what's going on here? And you would hope that people would be able to help get her to do what she needs to do to escape something like that. But yeah, I mean, in this case, I wouldn't just be talking to him. I'd be talking to everyone I could that would know to find out what's going on between them. What is the relationship like? And you know, you want to paint the whole picture, so when you go to court, you can paint that picture, right? Because to me, what do they always say? A picture says 1,000 words. So you want to paint a picture for the jury so they can understand your evidence and return the verdict that you want when the person is guilty, right? And if you don't, then this person who, right, he has a presumption of innocence right now, but everything is pointing to him as being the guilty person. And I think that most people can presume that he is, but we still have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And to help do that, you need that picture.
You don't, what we want to be clear about though is you don't need the body. There are lots of homicide cases in this country that were successfully prosecuted without any
Yep,
body at all.
absolutely.
So what we only need is an inference that she's dead based on circumstantial evidence, and that may be what we end up with in this case, and that's fine. You don't need motive, but it also helps, especially in a case without a body. Motive, when you don't have a body, motive can fill in the body blank, and it's
Right. And don't
often.
forget, everyone likes to say, oh, direct evidence is the best. No, circumstantial evidence is just as strong as direct.
Yeah,
People
it
try
can
and throw it out there. Oh, it's circumstantial. Yeah, but circumstantial is just as strong evidence as direct evidence.
it is, and it's also because direct evidence can sometimes just be one person who saw one thing once, and if that person is shaky, your evidence gets very, very weak. If you have
Yes.
lots of circumstantial evidence, even though no single piece is very strong, they each give strength to the other. And so that's why it's such a powerful case. I've always preferred circumstantial cases. And in a murder case, the eyewitness is gone anyway, so you have no choice. I don't think there will be an eyewitness in this case. It's possible he'll admit something at some point. Maybe, we don't have the death penalty in Massachusetts, but you never know what
But
pressure will come
you
to
have
bear.
the first degree versus second degree, and they could
Listen, I
second.
Yeah, and for prosecutors who don't want to allow or plead a second, which I would resist in a case like this, just because it seems so planned and intentional and malicious. And I'm not sure I'd let him plead to second, but just to get him to plead guilty at all, or at least to give an admission that makes your case stronger, somebody's got to bring some pressure to bear on him. And that's often his own family members. Think about the children, all of that sort of stuff. Who knows? And he may not have a conscience. He may not have much of a conscience, but that doesn't mean he can't be made to feel pressure. And we don't know where his pressure points are or what would make him change. But the point about being able to prove a case without a body, you know, that could take time, because the inference of death often needs time. If the shorter the period, the greater the chance the defense can say, listen, it's been a very short period of time. We don't know if she ran away with the boyfriend. I mean, that's always a big one when the body isn't found, that she somehow ran away with the boyfriend. I have a case like that, a still unsolved murder in Massachusetts, where that's still what the perpetrator husband keeps saying. She must have run away with her boyfriend. And it's clear that she's dead, clear to me that she's dead. But the thing about the jury that I just want to say, because it's so interesting to me, juries are both a wonderful thing about our system and without doubt the worst thing about our system, because the thing that makes jurors vote a certain way is usually how they identify with the people involved. So if you pick a jury in a case like this where they look at this defendant and say, boy, he seems a lot like me, or he seems like my neighbor or my brother or my friend, my husband, they're going to be so hard pressed to accept the evidence, circumstantial evidence, as proving a murder, because it hurts their feelings. It hurts them to accept that somebody they know or feel like they know could be such a bad guy. And in cases like that, the evidence can just swoosh right by and it doesn't stick. So I worry in cases like this mostly about who the jury is and defense attorneys are very good at picking perpetrators who have similar personality traits because they're going to look at a guy like that and be inclined to say, "Oh, I'm not going to vote guilty because that could have been me." And the desire to protect yourself from feeling bad, from feeling vulnerable, makes jurors vote the wrong way and completely inconsistent with common sense. That's the thing that scared me the most about cases like this. The notion that if he puts on this case of, I'm not the type of guy that would do that. I loved my wife. I love my children. Why would I, a loving father of three, ever kill my children's mother? I'm not that type. I saved her mother from choking to death. I'm not the type. Then you really have to get over that extra hurdle of helping the jury believe, no, he is the type, even though he's a lot like you or your father or your brother, he is the type because people like that kill people. They do. It's so really hard to get jurors to embrace that and beyond a reasonable doubt to accept that. It's almost like asking them to tear out their guts and give up their sense of reality. How does the world work? What kind of people are safe in the world? Who are the good people? Who are the bad people? When you ask them to give that up a little bit, their sense of how things work, it's so hard, so painful, so difficult that they'll often vote not guilty just because it makes them feel better.
Wow. That is super fascinating. The psychology of getting a conviction with a jury. Let's take a couple of quick questions and then we'll do final thoughts and wrap it up. This one is to you, Wendy. It comes from a user with a gazillion letters after their name. Do you think his federal sentencing date will be pushed out on the federal docket to allow for more reasonable time to conduct the state case? Then, horrifically, if hypothetically she was murdered, when we enter a dual state fed murder case because he violated conditions and allegedly committed murder while out on an ankle monitor with the feds, can't commit a crime waiting to be sentenced to another prior crime, 1 + 2 = 3, fed charges now, possibly.
Yeah.
Your
Well,
reaction.
I think the answer to that, it depends very much on what the federal sentencing guidelines say about what he's likely to get. He's a first offender, I think, although I've heard he had a record more than that. Maybe Jeff knows. If this is a first offense for him, um, and it's not considered the kind of crime where they want to put a body in federal prison, which is to say he's not likely to get prison time, then I think they stretch out the pre-sentencing time period as long as possible. Now his lawyer's going to fight it. If she thinks he could get out if sentenced, then she's going to push to get him sentenced in the federal case quickly because that'll get him out on bail. And there's nothing better from a defense perspective. There's nothing better than getting a guy out, even on $500,000 bail, because then, you know, the old adage, a good defense like a good wine gets better with age. You keep him out, witnesses die, evidence gets lost, you know, emotions fade, things get stale. You have a much better shot as a perpetrator if you could make your case delay. And in the state system, I was involved in a murder case last year that took 5 years to get to trial. Part of it was COVID, part of it wasn't, but 5 years to get to trial. And the guy got manslaughter. If he had been tried right up front, there's no way he would have gotten manslaughter. So believe me, defense attorneys love it when their guys get out. It greatly increases their chances of a conviction of a lower offense. But if he faces some significant, you know, a couple of years of time in federal prison for the art fraud case, then I think they go forward with sentencing as is. And you can still squeeze him while he's in federal jail. You can still do what you need to do on the state case.
Jeff, the next question comes from EV500 Sam. How long will it take to analyze the blood evidence and any other forensic evidence found in the basement?
It usually takes a little bit of time. It's not something that you can turn around and come back overnight. So I've always given myself, in my cases, when I've needed something, several weeks. Just because I know how much work goes into it, and you have to test everything and do everything. In this case, it probably won't take as long because it's not. They'll have her DNA, so they can test the blood and match the DNA from the blood to her DNA, right? Because they'll have her hairbrush, they'll have a toothbrush, they'll have access to her DNA, so it'll be a lot easier because it's not where it's someone who's not in the system. They already have real DNA to be able to match to make it quicker. I would go back on to say to the other question that you had, just to add, typically I would not see the federal prosecutors adding on any type of charges in this case, just because I know in Massachusetts, the DAs are very territorial over their homicides. I will say I have seen it happen a few times. In my case, the DAs allowed, the Essex and Suffolk County DAs gave us 6 of their homicides to charge federally in a RICO case. We also saw several years ago before the pandemic where the woman was kidnapped, killed, and they were driving. They caught him as he was driving down south with her body in the trunk. They prosecuted him federally. So could it happen? Yes, but typically the DAs, which are elected officials in Massachusetts, like to be able to say, "Hey, we've successfully prosecuted the case." But I will say the federal prosecutors and the district attorneys are working closely now to help make sure they can put the right squeeze. I know for a fact Aaron Hernandez, the ATF was bringing charges against him, and he commits his murder, and they end up not charging him because they didn't want to taint the jury pool over that murder with federal charges. So there is a lot of communication between the DAs and the federal prosecutors to make sure that they get what they need done.
Yeah, they are pretty good to each other, and they want to. Nobody wants to mess up somebody else's case, even if they want to get all the headlines. They still don't want to mess up the case. I want to say one other quick thing, Jeff. What you said about the DNA. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I bet they already have preliminary results. There's no question they know the blood type. I mean, you can do that with a test at CVS.
Right.
So they know it's her blood. I have no doubt, and they probably already have preliminary DNA results, because these days that's also, a matter of minutes. It really is. Whether they have the kind of reliable formal results they need for court, I think, is a separate question. But in a case like this, they can get that done so fast. You can get that done in hours. Preliminary.
I've also seen where I've always told, like, hey, it's going to take us a little time.
No, you're right that the to do it right and to do it well and so forth, it can. I've got a case with DNA that took over a year. No, I'm sorry, it took 18 months just to get the DNA done, and that was solely because they had so many cases that were more important, right? But this case, because importance does matter, and there is a triage, kind of like hospitals. There's no way this case wouldn't have gone immediately to the top of the heap, because a woman could be bleeding to death somewhere. I mean, they just need to know that this is a potentially life-saving test they need to do. She gets to go first. And they may then do some more serious formal forensic tests on the same blood later. But I have no doubt they know whose blood that is. I have no doubt they know it's her blood right now. And
I agree with you on that.
They have no need to tell us, right?
I agree with you on that too. Yes.
And the investigator on this panel is former special FBI agent Jeff Wood, retired out of Boston, who focused on gangs and gang violence. Jeff, what is next for Brian Walshe, the husband here? Do you expect a murder charge soon? And which way is this case headed, in your opinion?
I believe that the state police working their unit with Cohasset detectives are building their case as we speak, working hand in hand with the district attorney out of Norfolk to bring a murder case against this against Brian. That's my guess and my belief. And when they believe they have enough to publicly make the arrest or bring charges, they will. But again, they have their work to do. I don't want to.
We're talking hours, days, weeks before that could come.
I don't think it'll take weeks. I think in this case, it's going to be much sooner than that. You know, they found blood. They're searching different areas. They ruled out areas around the house because we know that they were searching the woods, the pool, the creek. Now they're going to other places to, but they found blood in the basement. They have him buying, cleaning. They have him Googling how to dispose of the body. I can't see it's going to take us weeks to see charges brought against him.
Attorney Wendy Murphy is co-director of the Women's and Children's Advocacy Project under the Center for Law and Social Responsibility at New England Law. She knows more about domestic violence cases than just about anyone in the United States of America. You've seen her all over NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News Channel. Wendy, closing thoughts here.
Well, for me, this case is very important because people are paying attention. And a lot of times when women get killed, we're not paying attention. So I hope that this case, among other things, creates a conversation, not just around how do we solve the mystery and is he lying and what's his behavior like and what else do we know about the blood, but also how did this relationship happen and what is it about violence against women that seems so epidemic today, and what are we doing wrong, and where is law enforcement failing? And all of those questions need to be asked because this is systemic in this country. America is described as among the 10 most dangerous nations on earth for women. It's third most dangerous for sexual violence, tied with Syria. We don't think about that when we talk about the United States. We're always seeing pictures of women in Iraq and wearing burqas and thinking, oh, isn't it wonderful that American women don't have to wear burqas? Well, but there are other problems, and the problems in this country that women face are substantial. So having this happen in Cohasset to a woman who seemingly has an awful lot of self-authority, she's got a good job, she lives in a nice place, she seems successful and happy and privileged. If it can happen to her, it can happen to anyone. And the lessons we learn from this case, I hope, expand well beyond the parameters of this one woman's apparent murder.
The message is, among many things, be nice to women. My mother is a woman. All of your mothers are women. Be nice to women, especially be nice to Wendy Murphy. Thanks to both of you. Incredible insight. Going to definitely get both of you back on this case and really appreciate it. Don't worry, we'll be back with another episode of Surviving the Survivor. But for now, love you, America.